So this is my absolute honor to be here with the Meteor and at Brooklyn Museum, and of course on this wonderfully curated stage.
I know, it's so pretty.
With Tarana and Kaia, who I've heard so much about over the years, and Tarana's a good friend of mine. So this will be a very intimate conversation that you will be able to have access to. So let's begin. We're at the 5th year anniversary of the viral Me Too movement. And Tarana, I just want to talk to you, because you've been doing this work, you've been doing racial justice work for a long time, you've been doing anti-violence work for a long time. So at this particular moment in time, why is it important for you to be on stage with Kaia? What does it mean for you?
Oh, what is it? Well, you know, this is our first public conversation. This is yes. Really nice. And I think one of the things I say all the time is I don't want to be, and this is no pressure to you, but I don't want to be the face of this movement in 5 years, right? The next 5 years. My child's generation, Kaia's generation, is doing amazing things, bigger things, hopefully better things than what I've done and what we've done. And so that feels really pivotal right now, because we are definitely, like, the Gen Zers are adults, kinda. And no, I'm just kidding, they're adults. You're 24. Your birthday is next week. You're 24. Anyway, so I'm claiming all my time. So yeah, I think that's important, right? Because people need to see that and see that there's not a clash here. There's a lot of space for us to grow and learn from each other.
Kaia, it's rare that we have family members in the movement, right? We have family members who've been affected by the trauma, but to be organizers or activists or people who speak out on these issues together is really important because it's a model of healing. So what did you learn about being a survivor and healing, growing up with your mother, who is a lifetime activist and organizer?
I think I learned a lot about giving myself grace. When I was first starting to have these conversations about what it meant to be a survivor with my mom, I was so hard on myself. Even though I've, been to every speech, I've been to every, program, I've been to all the things, trust me. And somehow still it wasn't clicking in my head that I needed to give myself some grace. I needed to give myself some time to actually accept healing. I needed to give myself some time to actually think and breathe. And so one of the great things about having you to hold my hand through that was you gave me space to breathe. Mm. And I was able to actually process what was happening. And I was able to actually get a grip on myself. So it was nice to have you and your empathetic presence.
Oh, child, don't make me cry. This makeup, it took a long time.
Our work, and your work in particular, has really thought about accountability, but also healing. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you, why have you emphasized healing as so pivotal to how we think about ending sexual assaults and sexual violence?
Well, first of all, when we talk about accountability, we almost always talk about it in terms of the person who caused the harm, right? Mm-hmm. The individual that caused the harm towards another individual. And that's indicative of how we think about sexual violence. We don't think about it as a societal issue, as a social justice issue, as a community issue that we are tasked with solving together, and that we all have some complicity in. We all have some complicity in it because we uphold rape culture and patriarchy and the different things that create the space for violence to happen. And so healing is important because when somebody is harmed in our community, the first question we should be asking is, what do we owe them, right? What do they need? And it's more than just, did you go to the police or have you seen a therapist? Every 68 seconds in this country, there's another act of sexual violence, which means we are constantly gaining new survivors. So while we have to fight to end sexual violence, we have to be very cognizant of what the people who have had this experience need. These are human beings who have multiple layers in their lives, and not for nothing, are experiencing compounded trauma in this moment. This is a traumatic time in our country. And so on top of carrying that, they're carrying the weight of dealing with sexual violence. So we have to center and talk about healing. And healing looks different for different people, but at least bring the conversation into the room. Bring resources to the people who are trying to provide those kind of healing modalities to people.
And As someone who's emphasized healing, how did you try to impart, or what were the conversations like about healing with Kaia?
Oh boy, similar to what Kai was saying earlier. As much as I did this work, and and I started with young people, so it was really difficult when it came home, and I just had to dig in the bag and to do what I knew. And what I knew is how I worked with the young girls in my programs. We've been having conversations now for, at least 10 years. I mean, Kaia first disclosed at like 11, I want to say. So it's been a long time. But those conversations have been about kind of what they were saying, being gentle with yourself, and knowing that your journey is going to change, and when it changes, that's okay. Being vocal about what you need, and creating community. Like, I'm a part of that community. Other people are part of that community as you're going along.
One of the things that I hold to me very, very closely is one of your Just Be-isms. Not a lot of people are familiar, but there was a program that my mother used to run called Just Be, and there were a set of isms that you were given, like, just be kind, just be creative. And my favorite one was just be resilient. Mm. And I think not only did we talk about resilience, but we talked about, you cultivated a very strong love of art for me as a way of healing. Expression. Very early, You taught me to express myself, whether it was writing it down. I would spend hours and hours and hours journaling to myself, just because my mom gave me a writing prompt. Or just like little things like that, little books to read that just cultivated not only like a healing space for me, but a space to be artistic and to have fun while also like dealing with this thing that has happened.
Well, I want to follow that up. I know you wrote a beautiful piece on the Meteor site about your story, and you said, "My name is Kaia." You were 22 then. I'm a Sagittarius, and I'm a 2-time survivor of sexual assault. And then you also wrote, "I thought healing was possible for everyone else. I clapped at the speeches. I just didn't think it was possible for me." So what did you think you meant by that? What did you mean by that at the time? And how did that shape maybe your life now with having a mom who's such a public figure around these issues? And when did you learn healing was possible for you?
I'm not gonna lie. It took a lot. It took a lot of talking, convincing, yes. Because the good thing about me is I went to school for acting. I know how to pretend. I could smile, I could nod, I could, all right. But it's a different thing to just smile and nod and say you believe versus actually believing it. So what I meant then was that it's easy for me to see it for other people. I can see so much light in other people, and I can see so much potential in other people for them to be the best versions of themselves. But it was really hard, especially after the second time. There is something so hard about dealing with it not once but twice that it just really wears down on your spirit. And so it becomes really hard to see yourself as somebody who is worthy or able to heal from that. If it happened once and happened twice, how do you recover, So a large part of me was just not able to see how I could recover. And something about once I hit the last, period, sent it off, and I was like, oh my God, this is my story, and my story is gonna be out there, and everyone's gonna know. And what am I gonna do when everybody knows? And then I realized I have watched you deal with everybody knowing these things about you, and still walking with so much grace and so much humility and so much love that I knew that I could do it too. I absolutely knew I could do it too. And so I wrote, I let it come out, and now I feel better.
I just want to thank you. I remember.
This is fun.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And I just want to say, Kai, I remember when I was 20 and I published my story in the feminist newspaper at Penn, and I'm a multiple rape survivor. So I told my childhood experience and being sexually raped twice in college. And having the multiple experiences, there's a different there's a shame that comes with when it, and there's all these reasons, of course, but it's very difficult. So thank you for writing, thank you for sharing, and thank you for getting through the shame and the self-blame that comes with these experiences that we did not choose. I want to just close, they're going to still be on stage, but I want to close this part with this idea of healing together is really powerful, and we can feel it in this brief moment on stage with you all. And I just want you to comment on what that process is like and what you hope we can take as a nation and as a community from that.
I talk to people about having community all the time. It doesn't have to be obviously mother and daughter, or mother and child. And for a lot of people, it can't be. But where you can find community is absolutely important. And community can be one other person. It doesn't have to be a big village. If you have somebody who pours into you and who you can pour into, somebody who you can trust with your story, because everybody doesn't deserve your story, then you can create community, and it helps. I don't believe we heal alone, not well. And Kaia's been healing for me in so many ways. I think they don't give themselves enough credit for me watching, because they're so young, so me watching that resilience that I didn't have at that age, I'm just like, oh man, if I can do one good thing, this is my resume right here. And I
I would also add, just what you were saying about community is something you taught me at a very young age. I take community very, very seriously. Even like today is a perfect example. I was very nervous to do this. So I told all my friends to come. I made sure every single one of my homies was in the audience. Love you. Because that's what community does, they show up for you when things are hard, when this is not an easy conversation to have, but I know when I get off this stage, I'm gonna get the biggest hug of my life.
From your mama first.
From my mama first, and then from my homies after, and it's gonna be lovely. Community is always gonna be there, you're right, we don't heal alone. There is nothing that I've gone through that I've gotten out of without putting my hand out and saying, I need your help. And that's a very, very powerful thing, to just ask for help. It's essential. But that's
Well, in the spirit of community, I would like to invite 2 other people to stage, because we're going to go from community, and I guess that's the basis of a movement. And so I'm honored to invite 2 extraordinary survivors and people to the stage with us, Chanel Miller and Anthony Rapp. This is really, really just amazing. So I just want to soak in this moment. You all have inspired so many of us with your stories and with your lives and with your radical bravery. Anthony, you came forward in 2017 to say that actor Kevin Spacey had assaulted you when you were 14 years old, and you later filed a suit against him. I know this is your first conversation since a jury found him not liable last month, so I want to thank you for your ongoing work to help survivors everywhere and for being here today.
Thank you.
So in our culture, we often think about these experiences as individual encounters, individual moments of trauma, but you see yourself as part of a larger movement. Can you tell us when that, when did you realize that, or was that always the case for you?
It happened in October 2017. I was hearing about the allegations against Harvey Weinstein, but I was sort of like vaguely paying attention. And somewhere in that time, I had heard people had shared with me other incidents that they'd experienced with Kevin Spacey over the many years. And so but I always sort of pushed my experience a little bit off to the side, because many of the stories I heard were worse. So I didn't think my experience necessarily rose to the level of those, but there was something about the multiplicity of experiences that these women, these incredibly courageous women who were talking about their experiences with Harvey Weinstein, in particular, Lupita Nyong'o's story, because also for her, she in many ways avoided the quote unquote worst of it, and how she articulated learning that there were so many more than her and how that affected her. That was sort of the real moment where the penny dropped for me about feeling like, yes, what I was a part of was something larger. And I could only have done what I did by coming forward because of Tarana Burke and all of those women. So, and you know, there have been other men who've come forward, but it's still, I think, a largely unexplored dimension, especially in show business. It's probably prevalent in many other industries, but certainly I think very much so in show business. I've talked to other, especially young actors coming up through, especially in Hollywood, more so than New York, probably. But I think that the lights are on enough that it's hopefully not happening as often to some of these very vulnerable young men.
What is it like for you to be on this stage next to Tarana in this moment, 5 years later from the Me Too going viral?
Well, when I got the invitation to come and I heard that I'd be on the stage with, you know, I came forward and I've done a couple interviews, but basically I felt like it was important as a white man to also give space because it's so much about women and it should be. But then to be included in the conversation to this degree with this paragon is incredible.
Can I say something to that? Salamishah, I'm glad you're acknowledging your privilege and that kind of thing, but it's an interesting thing when it comes to sexual violence, right? Because we have so few men come forward, and the stakes are so different, not more, but just different from women. So one of the things that I think has been the biggest challenge for us in the last 5 years is making it clear to people that this is not a woman's movement, it's a survivor's movement. And so, you know, I have followed your story from the beginning, and you coming forward along with some of the other men, the handful of men who've come forward, has been just as monumental, if not more, than women coming forward, because it just is so different for you all. But it also shows, and I think you being on this stage also, I think Salamishah would agree, as people who are in this work, it helps solidify that fact for people that this is about survivors, no matter how you identify, because sexual violence doesn't discriminate. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, and I think partly if you use like a survivor-centered approach, like we all are doing, 1 in 6 boys are victims of sexual assault, and I oftentimes think when we discount the stories of boys and men, we're making it sexual assault naturalized as this particular encounter between men and women, and so therefore it's inevitable. And I think it's really important to create a society in which no one has to survive sexual assault, but also when people share their stories, that it's constantly a safe space, because our goal is to eradicate, right? So thank you all for your work. Chanel, in this conversation about survivors and a movement for survivors, most of the people in this room first met you through your powerful victim statement you read at the sentencing of your assailant 6 years ago. When it was published anonymously, you ignited a movement. People in China and France, Japan were translating it. Others were posting videos of themselves reading it out loud. Can you tell us what the movement of people meant to you then, and how does it sustain you, or what does it mean to you over the last 6 years since?
Yeah, thank you. I also want to touch on what we were talking about with hierarchy, because I feel like when we rank trauma, we're thinking only of the physical details of what happened. And instead of just saying, well, what happened to you, we should be asking, well, what did it mean to you?
That's right.
Because there's so much more happening at the time of the assault. And so we have to think of all these other factors too when we hear the story of an assault, and not just think of the physical realm. I first told my story, I verbalized it in a courthouse, and there's no art on the walls, and anytime I spoke, the reception was really cold, and you can feel people rooting for you to fail. And anytime I cried, nobody rushed to my aid, which signaled to me that I was unworthy of help. When I decided to come forward, and by the way, Tarana opened that door, so I just had to walk through it. So when I decided to walk through Tarana's door, I was invited into spaces like these, and I would repeat the same story and it would feel completely different. I understood that when I speak, my words have weight. I can feel the silence in the room, which translates into respect. I can feel that what I'm saying is sinking into you and not just being dismissed. I feel that these walls are protected, that you're not going to leave this room and say mean things and twist what I've just said so that I can also put the story to rest. Being able to be in rooms like this and feel that stillness and the warmth of the reception has really rewired what the story has meant to me, how it lives in me, and now I'm not afraid to speak it anymore.
Something that I'm really interested in, as someone who also, told my story to police officers and tried to go through the judicial system, and I was curious for all of you, but also Anthony and Chanel, why was it important for you to go through that different legal processes, but legal process?
Well, in our state, the legislature made this really generous gesture by saying we recognize that so many of these things went unexplored, unexamined. Our statute of limitations in the state was a year. When I was 14, I didn't even know it was a crime.
Yeah.
So they said, okay, we will avail this of people. So that's a door that was open that I walked through. I will say that it turns out there are many complications. It's a gesture that is well-meaning. It is also there's all sorts of aspects of these sort of revival statutes. There's many problems with them for all sorts of other statutes that invade it. So it's not simple.
Yeah.
I will say the other thing, you spoke about this, not in so many words, but a courtroom is not a safe space for trauma. That is for sure. So I also deeply understand why some people don't pursue that angle. And, what is proof? How do you prove things? These are all, and part of the movement is so much about honoring a story, listening, being a mirror, holding healing. You speak about these things. Those things aren't necessarily anything that a courtroom is at all interested in.
Yeah, and I also think it's kind of an unfair question, perhaps, because these crimes are committed against us. So we should have every option available to seek redress and justice. It's just that the systems that are there often fail us. So thank you both for your bravery. I want to end with a big question for everyone, because I'm seeing the clock, so I want to get everyone's voice here. And, this notion, this idea of centering survivors is what we're working for. And Tarana, you mentioned this before when you were talking about what does it mean to have a world, in which survivors' voices are trusted and heard and believed. And then what does it mean to imagine a world in which survivors are already centered and already believe? What would that world look like?
Well, I have a vision that I think is clear. Our work in Meteor International organization is about trying to create that world that you talk about by healing and action in a very distilled down way. I believe that people who have survived sexual violence deserve healing, and I believe that we have the power to take action. We need medical interventions, research interventions, legal interventions, right? We need political interventions. All of those things have to happen at the same time. Think about who you are in the world, what your gifts and talents are, and how they can be lent to one of those interventions. And if it's none of those, at the very least, you can be an informed person about what sexual violence is, so that you can talk to people in your sphere of influence. We are surrounded by survivors all the time, so the way you think and move and talk and show up matters. So that's what you can do as an individual person when you leave this place. Think about every 68 seconds another act of sexual violence happens in this country. That's 1 minute, 2 minutes. We can count down on this clock. It would be uncomfortable to sit here for 68 seconds in silence. And every time another 68 seconds passes, we have a new survivor or another survivor compounded. Don't let 68 seconds keep passing without figuring out what your role is in that. And I know there's a lot going on. There's climate, and there's race, and there's this, and we got crazy people trying to be presidents. And I get it. I get it. But we have to see sexual violence on that spectrum of social justice issues that are right along all of those other issues, because we are ultimately fighting for liberation. We want to live in a world that is free of violence. All violence matters. Gun violence, political violence, sexual violence are all in the same place. So that's how we have to think about this. This is a fight for liberation, and all of it, figure out where your lane is, get in that lane, and do that work, whatever that work is.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I'll just give an opportunity for the rest of our panelists to say one phrase or one thing that they would like the audience to take away with to end sexual violence in our world.
Well, I think, like myself, I've talked to other friends who didn't necessarily recognize the scope or scale, and you spoke somewhat of this, like the question, yeah, you talk about what happened to you, but you don't talk about how it feels and what the impact was. That was never the conversation until the last 5 years, I think, for many, many people. So if you or your friend open up that door in a safe way with someone you love and trust to be able to start that process, because that is the only way to heal, I think. Otherwise, it's still this thing over there that you push away and look at from the outside, and it has to come from the inside.
Chanel and then Kaia.
I would say we talk about being survivor-centered, and I want to expand that center to include everyone who loves the survivor, because we think of them as individuals, but when something happens, everybody who loves them is also wounded. And so thinking about the survivor within the context of community. And lastly, I want to say, we talked about entering the court system, and in my case, there was so much emphasis on the sentencing and punishment, and I want to be clear that what I wanted from the very beginning and what I never got was acknowledgement. I was met with the message, no matter what you say or do, we will not see you. That is an incredibly punishing and painful place to put someone, and I was trapped in that space for a very long time. So you talk about freedom. You can free someone by acknowledging them, and often that's what we want first and foremost.
Thank you.
So, I was just thinking about what you were saying about liberation and how we are all fighting for liberation at the end of the day. And I want to say specifically, especially because this is my community, Black trans people face an incredible amount of violence. An incredible amount of violence. And a lot of times when we talk about sexual violence, we don't talk about the trans man that's being harassed by the man that won't accept that he's not a cis woman. You know what I mean? We're not talking about the trans woman that's getting followed down the block, harassed, beaten, assaulted. And so I think we need to widen our definition of who we're talking about and who we bring to the table as survivors. More trans people need to bring at the table. More queer people need to be at the table. More non-binary people need to be at the table. I want to see us up here thriving, you know? And I think one of the ways that you can get active is reach out to the marginalized people in your community. Talk to the Black queer people in your community. Ask them how you can help them. Talk to the trans people in community. Ask how you can keep them safe. There's an entire like buddy system that exists now for trans women that you can sign up for and like help a trans woman get home safely. Like, you know, there are ways to go in the community and really do something, so.